Hey, welcome back or welcome for the first time. To all my new listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. To all of my day 1 to 97, 250, or whatever week you chose to tune in and keep listening, I genuinely appreciate you. So, quick question. Have you ever had one of those moments where you realize like, oh, okay, I thought I healed from this? Like you really thought you grew and learned what you needed to learn in a certain situation, but then you find yourself going through exactly what you said would never happen again. And what's wild is sometimes it's not even this huge dramatic thing. Sometimes it's a reaction or a habit or a thought process or the way you respond when someone disappoints or offends you, or it may even be the way you start over-explaining yourself, chasing reassurance, or even starting to abandon yourself to keep a connection with someone. And I had a situation recently that really made me stop and reflect because I was like, okay, hold on. Why does this feel familiar? And why do I feel like I've been here before emotionally? And it was one of those moments where I could literally feel myself slipping back into old habits. And if I'm honest, that revelation was really disappointing because I have done so much work to heal. And I think when you spend a lot of time working on your healing or praying and reflecting and growing, you start to think there are certain things that you won't struggle with anymore. But the reality is that healing is not linear, where you just go from point A to point B. And sometimes life will expose an old wound, not because you failed, but because there's still a deeper level of freedom available. And I want you to be encouraged by that because initially my reaction was to feel shame. And I found myself thinking like, dang, why am I here again? Why am I still struggling with this? And why did this even affect me in the way that it did? And I think shame is pretty dangerous because shame will convince you that awareness means failure. But the reality is that awareness is oftentimes proof that you're growing, because the old you would have repeated the cycle and called it normal, but the healing version of you notices the cycle and wants different, and that's growth. And honestly, I think sometimes we romanticize healing like it's this beautiful, peaceful journey where you're sitting by the window, sipping your coffee with worship music playing in the background and the sunlight hitting your skin oh so perfectly because it's golden hour. Meanwhile, real healing sometimes looks like catching yourself mid-pattern and being like, girl, what are you doing right now? Or sometimes healing is realizing you're exhausted because you keep entertaining situations that require you to abandon yourself. Sometimes healing could be recognizing that you keep going back to old habits that temporarily soothe you but permanently drain you. And sometimes healing is recognizing that you keep trying to get different results with the same emotional decisions. I think for me, one of the biggest things that I've been learning is that cycles are often connected to familiarity, because even unhealthy patterns can feel emotionally comfortable when they're familiar. And that's why people can pray for change and then still struggle when change actually comes, because healing requires you to embrace what's unfamiliar. So you have to have different boundaries and different choices, different reactions, different conversations, and different levels of honesty. And if I'm being honest, sometimes I think I've confused intensity with connection. Like if something felt emotionally consuming or emotionally complicated, somehow my brain interpreted that as meaningful. And I think the Lord has really been showing me that peace and consistency may feel boring at first when your nervous system is used to chaos. Because if you've spent years emotionally surviving things, calm can actually feel suspicious. Healthy can feel unfamiliar, and stability can actually feel too quiet. And then you start creating emotional noise because your body is still expecting dysfunction. And that's actually a really wild concept to grasp, because I'm realizing that some cycles are not just spiritual. Some cycles are emotional habits, some are survival responses, some are learned behaviors, and some things require prayer and intentional work on my part to break free. And I know that right now, I am in a season where I genuinely want things to be different. Like, I don't want to keep revisiting the same emotional lessons year after year after year. I don't want temporary comfort at the expense of long-term peace. I don't want to keep explaining away things that I'm not okay with just because I care about someone. And honestly, I think part of growth is grieving the version of you that accepted less because they didn't know any better. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, because sometimes when you're healing, you start looking back at old versions of yourself with compassion, but also sadness at the same time. Like, dang, girl, you really were trying your best with what you knew, but now you know more. And when you know more, there's a responsibility to choose differently, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's lonely, and even when part of you misses what was familiar. And I think another thing I've realized is that cycles do not always break in one dramatic moment. Sometimes they break in tiny, consistent decisions, like choosing not to text back immediately, or choosing not to over-explain yourself, or choosing to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. It could be choosing honesty, boundaries, or rest. And sometimes it's choosing to stop romanticizing potential. But honestly, I think this season of my life has been less about perfection and more about awareness, because awareness gives you the opportunity to interrupt patterns before they fully repeat themselves. And I think that's where I'm at right now. I'm noticing things quicker, I'm recovering quicker, I'm reflecting quicker, and I really should celebrate that, because healing is not always I never struggle again. Sometimes healing looks like I no longer stay stuck there as long. And that's growth too. So if you're listening to this and you feel discouraged because you feel like you're repeating a cycle, I really want to encourage you not to let shame convince you that your progress disappeared. Because sometimes God allows things to resurface because now you finally have the tools, wisdoms, boundary, or support to confront it differently. And that's a completely different season than what you went through before. So that's what I have for y'all this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, make sure you're taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Be healthy in your relationships. Give yourself grace though, right? Don't beat yourself up if you make the same mistakes over and over again. Just keep trying to do better. I love y'all so much, and I will talk to y'all soon. Bye.